Most EV charging projects don't fail in the field. They fail long before that, during pre-development, when assumptions are followed instead of realities. Timelines get stretched into months and capital gets burned deploying at sites that were never viable. My guest today has lived that reality from every angle. Utility programs, network deployment, EPC execution. Instead of accepting it as the cost of doing business, he built a system that changed it. James Tillman is the co-founder and CEO of EVLogic, a platform designed for engineering and pricing EV charging sites in real time so stakeholders can align early, make decisions faster, and even kill bad projects before they become expensive ones. In this conversation, we break down why pre-development is the real bottleneck in EV infrastructure, how slow decision cycles destroy ROI, and why the next phase of EV charging won't be driven by hype, but by execution and precision. Let's get into it. Welcome to another episode of Field Frequency, powered by Field Advantage, an IT field services company specializing in the deployment, maintenance, and operation of critical infrastructure, including EV charging networks. Today, I'm happy to have James Tillman, CEO and co-founder of EVLogic. Hi, James.
Hey, good morning, Jason. How are you?
Doing well. So glad you could come on Field Frequency. Looking forward to this conversation. Looking forward to hearing from you, hearing and learning more about EVLogic. I think to get this thing kicked off, I think we should always start with your background and where you come from. I know you're an OG in the EV space, but for the audience, I'd like them to hear your background and kind of what the catalyst was leading up to building out EVLogic.
Sure. How long do we have? It's a long story, but I'll make it short. Short
Okay.
story long, right? Well, thank you for having me on the show. You know, I think it's the second show we've done together. We used to do something on I forget what was it called?
Clubhouse. It was Clubhouse. And Clubhouse was exclusive back in the day. That was only for iPhone users. And
oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And it was kind of like, it was supposed to have been the replacement radio. But yeah, that's a throwback.
Yeah,
Clubhouse.
that was a lot of fun. So, you know, if you ever need another co-host, just let me know. But until then, you know, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be on the show. So my background, so I've been in, you know, gosh, I've done a lot of things in the space. I've been a car nut for all my life. I just kind of grew up in that area. And my dad was a big mechanic. He builds airplanes. So that's kind of in my blood. Early in my career, I actually sold cars, which a lot of people don't know. But when they hear that, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Then I decided to go to business school because I decided there wasn't a big future in car sales for me. And I ended up taking a job running a capital improvement program and fleet operations for the city of Houston. So this is kind of how I got into the EV space, because with fleet and capital projects, they just kind of went hand in hand. So we won a grant for $2.5 million to optimize and electrify the downtown city of Houston motor pool. So it was a pretty cool project. From there, I met some folks at Reliant Energy. And they had just been bought by NRG, and their CEO wanted to drive his new Tesla Roadster onto the field of, at the time, Reliant Stadium and announce a DC fast charging network in the city of Houston. So remember, this is 2009. And I'm like, wow, this is great. These guys are just crazy enough for me, and I want to work with them. And so, you know, that kind of led into EVgo. Did EVgo in Houston, moved out here to California, where I live in Los Angeles today. Did that for a few years, did a mobility as a services startup, and then worked for a construction company. It was Brighten Energy services. It became Brighten Energy. And what we learned is we had a really hard time managing the early processing and wrangling the customers into making a decision. So it took about 4 months to get them, and thousands of dollars to get them to a yes or a no. And it took about 7 months and even more money to get them to cancel a project. And so we thought there needed to be a better way. And so we came up with EVLogic. Left my job, you know, late 23. Started, we incorporated in 24, and it's just been a wild ride ever since. So we're having a ton of fun. So that's kind of the background.
That's good background. And to double click on the trials and tribulations of deploying sites, like you said, trying to get a project off the ground, I think understanding where EVLogic sits from, you know, a value chain positioning, where maybe you could share for the audience exactly what EVLogic does within the vein of simplifying that process. What does EVLogic do, and where does it sit in the EV value chain?
Sure. We start early in the chain today. And so the problem that we're really solving for is something that we see in pretty much every vertical in the space, whether you're a CPO, a developer, an as a service provider, or a construction company, is you typically go on that first site walk. You drive an hour or two, you spend an hour or two on the site, drive an hour or two back, and you look around and you're like, oh my gosh, this is a really expensive meeting, right? And then you come back to your office, you lay something out in PowerPoint or Bluebeam, you send it to the client. And they're like, yes, this is great. This is what we want. How much does it cost? And so that's when it all starts. You have to commit resources to it. And so the EPC is usually doing more resources, but everybody else is waiting on the EPC, right? And so even though you might not be doing that estimating part, you're still like constrained by the time it takes. So on the EPC side, what happens is you send it to your estimator as a salesperson or project manager. The estimator will not put a number on anything that hasn't been engineered. So it goes to the engineering team. Usually the engineering team is working on other projects. So they'll get to it, they engineer it, they send it back to the estimator maybe a week, 10 days later. The estimator will go through that and they'll say, oh, I need to get bids from my suppliers and vendors and subcontractors. That goes out. 2 weeks later, it comes back in. And then the estimator will do their job. And that usually takes a day, day and a half. He compiles everything. Then it gets sent to the salesperson, or in this case, me. You put it together, you send it to the client. The client's like, not in a million years. This is like 3 or 4 times what we've even budgeted. And we had already doubled our budget because we knew it was going to be expensive, right? And so, it's a fire drill from there. Then your value engineering, your charging technology, process again. And then they're like, well, we've got this other other stakeholders, you've got competing priorities, and you go into this endless cycle. And so what we're doing at EVLogic is really trying to turn that upside down. So with EVLogic, you can design, engineer, and price out sites in real time on a platform like Teams or Zoom calls, have all the stakeholders on the phone at the same time, and go through all those iterations in real time and say, okay, great. Now everybody who's involved in this, we've stacked hands on the site, the location, the layout, the technology. Does it meet operational standards? All of these things. And is it within budgetary constraints? And once that happens, then you go out on a site validation versus a site walk to make sure the site the conditions are as stated. And typically what we're finding is that the conditions usually are, because one of those stakeholders is pretty intimate with the actual location. But occasionally you find other things, but then it's very quick to say, oh, here's a proposed change order before we even go to contract. It's going to add $17,000 to the price, whatever that number is. And so it really accelerates that sales cycle. And then we can do all the way up to a CD10 today. So it also helps, begin the utility process also.
That is amazing. And when you really, so as one that has deployed chargers across the US as a value-added reseller, selling a hardware, siting, getting it installed, supporting, et cetera. In previous lives, don't do that now. But as one, there is so many complexities as you succinctly brought that together. But if you start unpacking that for someone that says, hey, in fact, just within the last couple of weeks, site reached out, we've got some money, we want to put a DC fast charger in. An electrician told us it would be around $7,200 to put that DC fast charger in. I'm like, bogus. No way. That might buy your cabling. Maybe.
Right.
That's maybe. It. Maybe.
And it's right next to the switch gear.
Yeah. It's to run like a foot long. Yeah. Right. And I started just not trying to overwhelm them, but started talking to them about, has anyone talked to the utility? Do you have 3-phase? Do you have any? And they're like, deer in headlights. No. I'm like, well, where did that 7,200 come from? Well, they said we had 240. I'm like, oh, probably a level 2 charger was what you were thinking about. Anyways, EVLogic, when we talk about the value that EVLogic is creating, because like you said, in the sales cycle to deploy chargers, it's typically at the front end is that site walk. So electrical contractors or whoever it has lost a lot of money. So now they're saying $1,500, I'll come out and walk the site. If you move forward, that'll be rolled into the cost. If you don't, I need a check for $1,500 to $2,000. And that's just to get to the table. That's just to walk the site. So EVLogic in its platform can look at the location, and you've got the stakeholders on the call, and here's the pathway that we think. Here's the 2 spots or the 3 spots or the 4 spots we want to energize. This is the hardware, the output of the hardware that we're thinking of that we want to put here, and this is where we want to seed it. And then EVLogic is working its secret sauce to bring in and to predict those costs. Like you said, you're going to, on the other side of that, you might move forward with a site walk for a sanity check because there's differing site conditions. Obviously, you might be viewing this from a Google dashboard or something like that, Google mapping or something. I don't know. But the point is you're still going to need to get out there and do a sanity check. So very compelling solution for those wanting to deploy chargers. You've already clearly laid out some of the problems that you're solving. I'm curious, what prospects are compelled to consider EVLogic solution? Who needs to hear about the solution that you guys are bringing to market?
So and I want to take a step back before we go into that. You're right. What you're seeing in the EPC space is a dummy tax. And if you're only getting charged $1,500 for a site walk, you're getting a really great deal.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we kind of pride ourselves on EVLogic, and I wanted this to almost be like the catchphrase, the signature line, is really a fail early, fail fast, right? Because in my experience, we had about a 40% cancellation rate, and most of that was done pre-purchase order. So you can't recover those costs. So if you spent, $15,000 over 7 months getting the site ready to go and they cancel, well, where are you going to allocate those costs? On their next project? And so, you do see a lot of that. So we really try to go deep into engineering. So that way, you get a very accurate engineering number, and the reason being is because the underlying architecture for every charging station, especially on the DC side, and then split systems, is very complex, and they're all different. And so we dive very deep into commercially available charging stations that are on the system. So I think the question you asked is, who's kind of really our customers, right? Who's really chasing this product? And it's really interesting that the first folks that signed up for our beta back in May of last year were as a service providers. So these are the folks that come in and they'll do the capital investment and they'll sell it back in the form of either by the mile or kilowatt hour. And they can do everything from the charging stations, include the energy, maybe they even buy the vehicles as well. So, that's the as a service model, similar to PPA for solar power purchase agreement, right? What the value that they found is all the iterations can be done instantly. When they do a project, it's the same thing. They go on a sidewalk, they've got an EPC or 3 out there with them. And then they get their number 3 weeks later. Well, they need a CapEx number to put in their model so they can unitize and say, okay, great. The way that you've got it laid out is going to be between 52 and 58 cents a kilowatt hour, whatever that number is. I'm making it up, right? But then they say, oh, well, that's more than we budgeted, or oh, somebody said that we should use 80 amp level 2s instead, or oh, we got to move them somewhere else. There's all these things that just come up that like one more thing, right? Forgot to mention. And so with EVLogic, they can do that like this, and they'll have an answer within literally minutes, and then they can put that CapEx into their model and get a new estimate, right away. And so that really changes the confidence that your customer has in the system, because they're like, why is this taking so long? I thought you guys do this all the time, right? So we're getting a lot of as a service customers on there. We're getting EPCs. We have A&E firms, charge point operators. We're even working with a community college to be their software platform for an EV infrastructure certification course, which is a 14-week course, which is kind of like, wow, that's really cool. And so we're really surprised at the people who are signing up. We're also helping folks that do project finance. They don't really know how to underwrite projects, and that they don't know if the construction prices they're looking at are real or not. To your $7,200 point, it's like, oh, well, the financials look great on a $7,200 per port install on a DC fast charger. But once they find out it's 40 or 50, it changes their mind. And so that's been really neat too. So we've been very fortunate to touch a lot of verticals in our industry.
Yeah, it would seem almost a no-brainer for architecture and engineering firms to be looking at this as a part of their value add to helping customers, helping their clients understand what the budget looks like. But electrical contractors should be looking at that from a streamlining, like initial sanity check in terms of cost to deploy. Okay, you want to put some 120 kilowatt chargers out here, baseline cost. That way they can kind of churn through what's real as far as an opportunity and what's not real, and move on to the real customers versus folks.
100%. And it allows that communication and that,
Mm.
real time number to come up. And again, you don't have to be an estimator or an engineer to use this. It was built for people like me, sales guys who are dangerous. But it's like, okay, hey, we're in the realm of a budget with 5 or 10% on either side of this. And we're testing a lot closer to 3 to 5. But
Mhm.
regardless, it's like, hey, if this works for you, everything's ready. It's like, let's go into contract. Let's get a PO in place and we can start putting a sharper pencil on this, right? So instead of, distracting the estimators and the engineers with a bunch of business development work where we know that, maybe there's a 30% win rate, we're only going to bother them with the projects that are like, hey, these are actually real. And as a salesperson, that's a really hard challenge because you want and you believe that all your deals are real, right? Every single one is real, but the reality is the ones that you try hardest on and the ones that last the longest, especially in this space, those are going to die. I hate to tell you that, but
Mhm.
you're spinning your wheels for nothing. And so
Yeah.
we try to also live that kind of mindset at EVLogic too. It's like, hey, look, if we're not the right fit today, that's okay. Well, call me back when we've added a feature that you think makes sense for you. Because we don't have time to waste. We got to keep going. And I feel that that's just the way that our business works. We're under the gun. Yeah, I saw an article the other day that we did 30% increase of DC fast chargers year over year as far as an installation rate, which is like 18,000, something like that.
Mhm.
The reality is that's about a third of where we need to be.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
There's
Yeah.
so much work and opportunity out there, but the challenge keeps coming in is that, hey, we're so slow on this upfront portion of the process, and we have so much cancellation because projects aren't real that we can't even get it through the pipeline to even start messing with AHJs and utility interconnection, right? So it's like what we did is like, hey, here's a real big pain point that there's just not a great solution for. Let's focus on that. Can we focus on other things? Maybe later, but it's like our focus is definitely pre-development and sales today.
Yeah. Yeah. Just the timing. People, if they've not deployed chargers, they just don't understand the timing that goes along with it. And what was it? What was the number count? Because to your point of we're about a third of where we need to be. What was the magic number when the Biden administration rolled out the IRA funding for that led to NEVI? That was like it's like 50,000 chargers by 2030, or maybe I may have the numbers and the dates mixed up, but it was this really aggressive, ambitious number of, I want to say it's 50,000 sites or something like that. And it's just, again, anyone can say any kind of number. It's just, if it's not really attached to reality, if the complexities of what it means to deploy chargers. And so, in your example of where you said, hey, we may pivot from DC to 80 amp L2 chargers because of budget or because of spacing or because of other constraints. Feeding the machine, the EVLogic machine, has got to be some data points, maybe from the OEM, the manufacturers of the chargers themselves. Because like you said, if we're looking at a site and they're thinking, oh, well, we don't know what our power constraints are. We don't know what our utility constraints are. So maybe we're looking at this from 120, but the insights prove that no, maybe you want to go up higher because the local amenities nearby would, maybe there's something you can do different. Maybe you want 180. So cutting to the chase, I would think that the OEMs would be a part of the data points that you are bringing into this space to help forecast what costs and timelines would look like. Is that valid?
Yeah, yes and no. I think,
Okay.
obviously that's the direction we're going. We do have pretty deep relationships with a handful of charging OEMs, and those are
Mhm.
the ones that we dive really deep into their installation manuals. What we find, we do have a verification program that we've just launched. And so it's going to be a filterable feature starting in March, and those will indicate which charging OEM brands that we have done the deep dive into. So
Okay.
what we find typically when we dive into an installation manual is they're poorly translated. And so nobody on the American side or the English speaking world has really gone through it because I don't know if you've read one of these, but if
Mhm.
you're having problems sleeping, uh, that's it's a good cure for that. But we kind of know, one of my co-founders, Dave Lopez, he's got 14 years experience in this in renewable energy engineering and 6 or 7 EV. So we know where the dead bodies are, and so we're very
Mhm.
able to quickly identify, hey, this doesn't make sense. It's inconsistent. It doesn't meet, national electric code. And so once we identify these inconsistencies within the manuals, we go back to the OEM and we start asking questions. And they're like, oh yeah, so this isn't correct. We need to change that. And so number one, the benefit there is they can update their installation manuals, which is going to help a lot of pain points out in the field. Because I don't know if you've ever been in the field, I'm sure you have, and you've got like, a stencil, right? And you put it down and you do all your foundations to the stencil and then realize the stencil's inverted. Right. Or just silly things like that. And you're like, well, we got to remove this housekeeping pad or somehow chisel it out. Right. And so we go through that, we do any type of custom coding, and then that ensures that the engineering on the back end is right. So that's super important for us. And then what we do is we do have a handful of stations from other OEMs that we're still working to build that relation on, because we do feel it's important to have a lot of stations in there, because the way that our filtering system works is really to begin with the end in mind. So if you're working with the customer and you say, okay, to your point, what do you think your kW speed needs to be? What about your cord sets? Are you looking, just because you have a 350, kW dispenser, if you're only putting a 200 amp cable on it, things aren't going to really work the way that you want it to. And so we have that level of details. Like I want cord set 1 to be 17 feet, have a 400 amp cable with a CCS1 contactor, and I need the second cable to be 21 feet, and it needs to be 380 amps with a NACS connector, right? And use a credit card reader, use RFID, and so you can click all these boxes, and then what we have in the database pops up. And so it's pretty slick. And so that way, again, you're beginning with the end in mind. You can take a consultative approach. And so we find that that's a pretty unique way to select your charging stations that you put into the platform and build with those sites. You can also look at multiple technologies. So if you like, OEM 1, and you want to look at OEM 2, or you want to look at 25 kW DC versus the cost of an 80 amp level 2. I mean, this is the platform to do it in, right? Because, once you go down to that 80 amp station, number one, you're at 208, not 240. So you've got that first issue. The second issue is, you're looking at a lot more copper on that level 2. And so maybe you're spending $10,000 less a station, but you might be increasing your install $15,000 a station. And EVLogic really provides the platform to do that analysis.
Love it. Putting the logic into the planning, the pre-planning and pre-staging. That's fantastic. Well, thanks, James, for sharing the, what EVLogic is doing. I'd like us to kind of zoom out and have a conversation about the industry for a few moments. When did EVLogic launch?
EVLogic officially launched. We incorporated January 2nd of 2024. We came up with the idea in September or October. My wife bought a new car, and she told me she was going to park it in the garage. And so I don't know if you can see, but I have a bike here that used to be in the garage. And so a lot of other things too. And so we had someone build out the garage, and it was a really cool experience. He took his phone, stood in the middle of the garage, went like this, took a couple measurements. Let's hop on Zoom on Tuesday. That's what we did. He had a 3D rendering of my garage on the computer, and he goes, James, are you ready to build your dream garage? I'm like, heck yeah, let's do it. And so he was dragging and dropping and moving boxes and slats, like, hey, do you have golf clubs? Yeah. I was like, you got bikes? I was like, dude, I got bikes, right? And so things hanging from the ceiling, all sorts of cool stuff. And so he's like, do you love it? I'm like, yeah, that was actually really cool. And so he hits a button and it gives me a bill of materials. I'm like, ooh, it was like 16 grand. I was like, I don't want it that much, right? And so we value engineered it. And so after that experience, I called Sage, I called Chris. I'm like, this is what our industry needs. And Sage goes, yeah, you're right. He goes, it exists in solar. It exists in almost every other industry, but not ours. And so that's kind of what launched the idea and getting all the pieces together. So just a little over 2 years since we've been corporate.
Wow. It's always cool to hear what the catalyst was. That's cool. Well, okay. So, founding in a down cycle, what would you say as a founder, co-founder, what's harder about launching a company? Now, you've been in this space, like you said, you know where the bodies are buried. Yeah. But what's it like launching in the space? What's secretly easier because of the pullback? Maybe there's some gaps created by that, or what? Talk to me about that.
I'll give you what I think, but the reality is I haven't founded a company when there were tailwinds. So I only have this experience. What people tell me is like, gosh, if you had this 3 or 4 years ago, you'd probably be retired by now, right? It'd be a very different game. But I think even like with the incentives going away from cars and, less money out there to build infrastructure, what I think it does is a number of things. It causes us to be smarter, right? With how we're operating and bootstrapping a company. It also causes developers to be smarter as well. They don't have the money to throw around on projects that don't quite pencil. And so a product like ours becomes even more valuable during a downturn. I think the headlines are overblown, right? I mean, one of the things that we see in the space is we have a unique viewpoint. I see hundreds, almost thousands of sites built in the platform. So I can kind of tell you what we're seeing being built and the conversations that we're having. And we're seeing a ton of fleet projects. We're still seeing retail projects. Retail projects are smaller than they used to be. Those are also the ones that get iterated the most, which is interesting. We're still seeing a ton of multifamily, but those projects are getting larger, ironically, and they're all using load management. And so we have load management on the platform too. And ironically, and I'm sure Anoop will appreciate this, we're seeing a lot of hotels, right? And that makes a ton of sense. 10 years ago, it's like no one's going to drive a Nissan Leaf 65 miles to stay at a hotel. But today, I've got cars in the garage that go 350 miles. And it's like, oh yeah, going to San Francisco or Phoenix or something about, Las Vegas, that's an actual doable road trip, sometimes even without a charge. So hotels definitely make sense. Yeah, it's just been a ton of fun doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think with, go to market for you guys, customers are obviously cautious. Budgets are tight. This is helping to cut through the noise and get to a place where it's viable, or maybe where it's not viable, and you focus on where to focus the energy. It's a redirecting of that. And I like that you call out, let's not necessarily believe the hype of the headlines. Interesting enough, episode that just released this week of Field Frequency had some of that echoed in that episode. And we had Florent Brenton from Perrin on, and he was talking about there's been 30% increase from 2024 to 2025 in DC fast charging sessions. I think it was like 140 something million successful charging sessions that happened during the year 2025. And that was a significant increase from 2024. So if those successful transactions and charging sessions are happening, that means that there's more chargers. That's part of that number. And so, I think you got to strip out the headlines, but what's genuinely hard right now in this space versus what's maybe noise?
I think, getting capital is a little bit challenging, but, I saw a friend's company get funded yesterday. It's a little bit different business, but it's in the EV space. James Tillman over at Mitra EV, they just got a $27 million Series A. Congratulations to them. And those are the stories that always keep us going too. It's good to see sunshine on a cloudy day. And I think that's what it is. It's a cloudy day. Is it a hurricane? No. Any industry doesn't just go like this, right? There's bumps and dips and valleys along the way. And I think we're kind of more in a flat stage right now versus more of a decline, and I think, we're about to start seeing, and Cox talks about this too, a big influx of off-lease cars coming into the used EV space. And I think, my LinkedIn post today is about how those are the most undervalued assets on the market. What a deal to go and get a 3-year-old low mileage EV for 40% of MSRP. That's a huge value. And so I think what you're going to see is those people who come in for a lease return are likely going to buy another EV, right? And then you get exposure to a new set of EV curious buyers, right? So, the need for charging is going to grow. I think I read a stat somewhere that in the United States, we have something like 30 EVs for every public port, right? And we've got about an 8 or 9% adoption rate on the new vehicle market side, right? But when you go to Canada, that number is closer to 9 to 1, 9 cars for every charging port. And they're at about 25 to 30% adoption rate. And when you go to China, you look at their numbers, it's 2 to 1, right? And it's not even close to the adoptions. And I realize those are different markets in different areas. But the reality is there's definitely a correlation between charging infrastructure and adoption, no matter how psychological it is. And we used to talk about this in the early days of EVgo. It's not just about, we're trying to solve range anxiety by giving range confidence. And one of the unique lessons we had there was, we would start very center within a town and then go outbound. And so the idea would be, you're never further than 5 miles on a major interstate from a DC fast charger. Because that means you had a place in basically every 10 miles apart, right? That's the easy math. But what we found out is nobody ever used the furthest charging station that we deployed. But when that charging station got used is when we placed the next one, because that furthest charging station out gave people the confidence to go a little bit further, even though they didn't use it, because then they could rely on that closer charging station if they actually needed it. So it's, you got all these very interesting learnings over time. But, I think we're going to still see a lot of growth in the space. There's a lot of opportunity. I'm glad to see NEVI funding back. I'm glad to see fleets making, TCO decisions. And I think, again, this is the industry growing up, right? It's like, hey, just like, you're 18, 19, you just finished college, maybe a little 20s, you got to move out, right? You just can't live at home in your mom's basement anymore. And I think that's kind of where we're at in the industry. And so you're gonna probably see some consolidation. You're gonna see some companies go out of business. The strong are gonna survive, and things are going to change, right? Prices will come down. The last time we lost the $7,500 tax credit when it was capped at 200,000 units, Tesla's lowered prices, right? So there is a solid argument that prices are inflated because there's just a lot of money out there. I think what California is flirting with kind of replacing that incentive with people who are buying their first EV, I think that makes a lot of sense too. It's like, I've taken advantage of the tax many times, but it's like, I'm a buyer, I'm a believer, right? I my own dog food, but it's like getting those people who haven't bought in yet. I think that was a really smart twist on the incentive. So I'm excited about the future. It's going to be a little flat, or just 2 or 3% growth for the next 2, maybe 3 years, but I don't see that lasting much longer.
Yeah, no, I'm aligned with that, and I think to your point of the incentives shifting to new buyers versus those that are already have taken advantage of that, I think that's the right move. Anything that moves things forward. We've got a episode coming up pretty soon with John Volker, contributing editor for Car and Driver, and he talked about the secondary market within EVs, kind of like what you alluded to a moment ago about just the amount of used EVs that are out there that are available, and people can acquire those for obviously a more cost-effective way, and they've still got plenty of range. Right now, I have a 2019 Leaf sitting out in the driveway, and it's 2019. It maybe a little over 40,000 miles. Lots of life left in that vehicle. If I ever wanted to offload that, if someone else was to pick that up, that they've got a new vehicle with nice interior, and sounds like a commercial for my car. It's really not. But anyways, the point being is just that. The point is,
here's the link down below.
Call me. Yeah. No. The thing is secondary market is there, and just helping to move the adoption curve in the right direction.
And even like Tesla, right? And I'm very technology agnostic, but Tesla has a pre-owned lease program. I was on it the other day. You can get a 3 or 4 year old Model 3 with 35,000, 40,000 miles on it for a couple grand down and $300 a month. But if you've ever been curious and you don't want to spend a lot of money and you want the guaranteed back end residual value, dude, that's the way to go. And these cars still have close to 300 miles on it. And as you know, you drive a Leaf, that Leaf probably has 150-ish mile range, unless you got the extended battery.
215. Yeah.
That's more than you'll ever need. I mean, I'm charged my cars like every 10 days. Right? I mean, like, you're just driving around town for the most part. And then when you leave town, it's like I'm either flying or I've got the route planner, and it's not a big deal. I've got kids. When you have kids, even my oldest is almost 13. They still get the wiggles. They still have to go to the bathroom on non-planned stops. So it's really easy to plan those around infrastructure. And it's like, even if I'm just getting 5 or 10 minutes while they're going to the bathroom or whatnot, it's like, cool, I don't have an extra stop that's not efficient in my journey. And you're seeing so many more stations pop up. And I think what Tesla's doing also with kind of democratizing the ability to deploy and own Tesla charging sites is actually a brilliant idea. And we're seeing a lot more deployment of that. It's getting better every day.
It is. Although there's always the contrarians, a contrarian that's in my orbit that's heard me talk about, secondary market used EVs and all that, flagged the announcement by Elon of the X and the S being taken out. And so like, what about all the used versions of those that are out there available on the market? They're buying a car that's already sunset, and how will support look like? And, obviously there's always going to be the contrarians that have an opposing view, just to have an opposing view, just because they don't believe in the tech, and really, I'm fairly confident that most of the people that have an opposing view of the tech just haven't had the experience with the tech, because then they would change. Because I don't really care about not having a landline in my home.
I buy a pre-owned Model S, a 22, Model S tomorrow, right? I mean, I loved mine. It was such a great car. And I think the technology. If you're replacing a 10-year-old car and you step into a 3 or 4-year-old Model S for $35,000 or $40,000, you're going to be blown away, right? And so why not? I think it just expands the market. And the reality is the same person probably be really happy buying a classic Corvette or something like that. It's been discontinued, but or whatnot. Yeah, it's kind of a straw man argument, but it is what it is, and that's okay. I've never been like, the type of person like, oh, EV is the only way. I'm kind of, I've always been an all the above kind of person. I think we need to explore a lot of solutions. To me, I think EV makes a ton of sense. In my personal life, I've explored PHEVs. They made a ton of sense to me too. It's like, hey, at 40 or 50 miles, I can do 95% of my driving. And then, and if I go to Big Bear or, San Francisco, I've got gasoline. I think that's a great solution. It's a good gateway drug. I also understand some of the counter arguments against that, but I think we should be more accepting of people who are, hey, let me try this out. And these are kind of my constraints. And people's like, well, they never plug in. It's like, who cares? It's like they're trying it out, and we're not all perfect people. It's sort of like with energy. I think it's an all of the above strategy. We should have nuclear, we should have solar, we should have wind, we should have all of these things, battery backup. It doesn't have to be like, you love solar, I love solar, and that's the only thing it can be. It's like, that's just such a silly argument. You got to get over that.
Yeah, I agree. And everything is about use application too. I know, well, right now I've been 100% EV, two EVs sitting outside the house right now, but I've got a vehicle purchase on the immediate horizon, and it's going to be a pickup truck for use case application. So, but again, it doesn't take away from the fact that I firmly believe in the use of EV and its benefits. But
Absolutely.
yeah.
I was going to say, I think almost every household in the country, there's a 2-car family, one of them could be an EV, right? And that's how we started. So same thing is like, but we had like a Nissan Pathfinder that we kept because it fit the whole family and all of our junk a lot better. But then it got to the point, it's like, at that time I had a Chevy Bolt. And so we had this really nice Pathfinder and a Chevy Bolt. And we were taking the Chevy Bolt everywhere. It just became the car. And so we're like, fine, let's just have both, let's just get 2 EVs. But to your point, it's like, I understand the necessity of having a truck, especially if you're pulling a boat, 400 or 500 miles. It's like, hey, if you use a truck like that under those use cases, an EV might not be the right vehicle choice for you. And that's okay. Right? It's such I feel like an old Seinfeld conversation. It's like, that's okay. You can drive an ICE vehicle. It's okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Well, James, this has been a great conversation. Appreciated hearing your thoughts about the industry. Appreciated learning about EVLogic. I know it's definitely going to connect with someone out there listening right now, as far as the value that product is brought to market, that solution is brought to market. And as we get ready to wrap up, obviously I'd like you to share how people can connect with you, how they can learn about EVLogic, where to reach out to you, et cetera. I'd like you to share that if you could before we close out.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah. Great conversation. I always enjoy hanging out with you. We'll see you probably at EVCS, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So that's one place, EVCS. I'm always at that one, ACT, a few others. But, obviously I'm on LinkedIn. There's a book and appointment link right there on my page. We're at evlogic.ai is the website. You can put that right there. I don't know if you can do that or not. But yeah, I mean, yeah. My contact, the best way to get me is through LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on it, especially lately, which has been kind of an interesting journey for me as well. I'm not a big social media fan, so really learning how that works and putting myself out there for a lot of those posts has been an interesting project. But yeah, I think that's the best way to get me. LinkedIn, the website, email address is J Tillman at EVLogic. But love to talk to anybody, even if it's just kind of like this, shooting the shit on the EV business and what's going on, and happy to give my 2 cents worth on pretty much anything. And we're always looking for partnerships and integrations too. So, if you got something that's kind of parallel to what we're doing and you think there's a way for us to work together, let's talk. I mean, it's more about that. I don't want to recreate the wheel. I want to stay in my lane, and I want to really lift this industry. I'm reading articles that say we spent $7.5 billion and only built 4 charging stations, or 400, whatever. It's like, there's so many things wrong with that statement, but that's just a big driving force for me to figure out how to catalyze the industry, accelerate the process. And for me, it's all about getting more infrastructure in the ground. So if that's how you see infrastructure and you want to work together in any way, shape, or form, reach out. Let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you, James, for coming on Field Frequency.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, Jason.
This episode was produced and edited by the team at Autozy. To find out more, visit autozy.co, AUTOZY.co.